teams are reportedly monitoring Anthony Edwards' long-term future in Minnesota. Should the Timberwolves be a little bit worried? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Plus, the Milwaukee Bucks are ready to pursue Bradley Beal over Jimmy Butler, and the Miami Heat make a change to their lineup that actually works out pretty well. Is it the future of the Miami Heat? We're going to talk about it all and more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything basketball related. I'm the host, Sir Hayes, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today. So, Brett Siegel talked about the future of Anthony Edwards, saying this: a lot more answers will be given when the ownership face off between Glenn Taylor and the new ownership group of Mark Lore and Alex Rodriguez finally ends. But elite personnel are quietly keeping an eye on Anthony Edwards and what Minnesota does to assure him that he's their top priority. It's clear that Edwards has been frustrated this season. Aside from being fined 4 different times for language and gestures directed towards official, Edwards has called out his teammates multiple times in the media. Now, I want to add in this, it's not part of the quote, the fact that Anthony Edwards has called himself out as well. Yes, he's talked about the starters. He's talked about the lack of energy. He's talked about the lack of execution. He's talked about his frustration, but he's also talked about himself in that as well. The last thing I want to do is paint Anthony Edwards as some drama queen that only points the finger at his teammates. He does call out his teammates at times. He does call out the starting lineup at times, but he always makes sure to include himself in that. He doesn't do the thing where he separates himself from the criticism over the team. He includes himself in that criticism. So I just wanted to point that out, even though that wasn't part of the quote when it came down to it. And the Minnesota Timberwolves are a team that I've talked a little bit about, quite a bit about here, right? I had an episode not too long ago in which I talked about how the lineups with Jaden McDaniels are really where the negatives are coming at. A lot of, fans and basketball fans really point towards Julius Randle, but the Timberwolves are winning the minutes when Julius Randle is actually out on the court. They have a positive point differential when Randle's on the court than not. Look at lineups with Julius Randle on. They have a net rating of plus 3.4. They have a positive plus minus of 8.7, a defensive rating of 112, which isn't great. It's still below league average, but it's okay. An offensive rating of 115, right? When he's on the court, you flip that and look at that when he's off the court, right? They have a negative net rating, a negative plus minus. Their defensive rating does get better, though, at 108, but their offensive rating also gets worse. For the Minnesota Timberwolves, a lot of this has come down to, if you're trying to zero in on a player, it really comes down to Jaden McDaniels. They're negative 10 when he's on the court. They have a negative net rating. Their defensive rating is 113. Their offensive rating was worse at 112. They're also shooting a worse true shooting percentage. So Jaden McDaniels is having a down season. Now, I'm not blaming the entire Minnesota Timberwolves struggles on Jaden McDaniels because that wouldn't be fair, right? It's a lot going on with this team. But you look at him, they're 10th in overall net rating on the season. They're 16th in offensive rating, 6th in overall defensive rating, but yet they can't find the forward momentum. They find themselves 8th right now in the Western Conference at 22-20. And, especially with how close that Western Conference is, their error of margin is really small. So I can understand teams waiting and looking, and it wouldn't be the first time. We know that the Minnesota Timberwolves are a team that, they seem to build up stars, and then those stars eventually get frustrated. And so teams are waiting to see and monitoring what the Timberwolves do with Anthony Edwards. Now, I'll say this, right? Again, this is personal. This isn't what's in the report. But I don't think that the Timberwolves explore the idea of moving on from Anthony Edwards anytime soon. I think unless Anthony Edwards marches into the front office and says, get me out of here, or else, they won't even entertain the thought of moving Anthony Edwards, and they shouldn't. Because what they should be looking to do, especially after making the trade to free up some more space, how are they going to use that to try to correct some of the things that's going on with this team? That's the question that they should be asking themselves. They got Ant locked up until 2028, 2029. He's going to be on that contract for a long time. They are not in a place anytime soon where they need to make a decision. Now, that does not mean that Anthony Edwards can't put pressure on that team. That's not to say that Anthony Edwards can't make it uncomfortable to make sure that he's going to hold that team accountable to putting out a team that he feels like he can compete with. I think that's the frustration overall that Anthony Edwards is facing, right? It comes down to this team, right, not being up to the par of where they finished last season. And when you're a young player in this league, it's easy to think that when you have that type of success, that run of the Timberwolves, went on last season, it's easy to look at that and think, this is just the beginning of it. We're going to be better next season and better the season after that. And Anthony Edwards is now facing the reality that, hey, that's just not the case, right? This team has taken several steps back. Now, can they recover it? That's the biggest question here, right? And so teams can sniff around all they want if Anthony Edwards is going to be available. But I think ultimately the Minnesota Timberwolves have to hold themselves accountable for the fact that this is broken now. It's broken to a degree. And they have to find a way to fix it. And they have to find a way to make this better with what they got and what they have coming on the horizon to make sure that they create this environment where Anthony Edwards feels like he is in place to compete every single year. Because a player that's as competitive as what Anthony Edwards is, he's not going to settle if he feels like he's on a team that just cannot find their footing, a front office that's not being aggressive enough to help them get on that path. It's just not. He's not going to do it. So while the Minnesota Timberwolves, they have the Detroit Pistons pick if it falls anywhere between 14 and 30. They have their own pick is what? No, their own pick I think is going to Utah, or do they have Utah's pick? I think is what comes here. No, their pick's going to Utah. I got to get that correct. My bad. So they could have a first round pick in this draft, even though it's lower. But with the talent that they have on this draft, they could very well want that. So the Timberwolves got to figure this thing out, man. And this isn't going to get easy on them, so to say, anytime soon. So they really have to consider every move that they're doing and how it affects the future outlook for Anthony Edwards. And listen, that's the pressure that you put on when you have a talent like Anthony Edwards. It'd be different if they just had some good players on there, but you got Edwards, a player that people have talked about that could be the face of the league at some point, a guy that has stepped up his game, for this team and has continually grown for this Minnesota Timberwolves team. He's 8th in the league in scoring right now overall, right? And you look at what he's doing. Yeah, he can be more efficient at times. He's having his best season from three per volume and percentage. So he stepped that part out to help adapt to what they have going on here. And you want to make sure that you keep a player like that healthy, because I tell you what, if the Minnesota Timberwolves lose a player like Anthony Edwards to the point where he asks out, you're not going to get another player like that probably for the next decade, especially when you're the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? So the Timberwolves have to do as much to keep their homegrown talent. You already traded away Karl-Anthony Towns, who wanted to stay in Minnesota, right? And so now you got to keep working on this thing. And let's hope that they can, right? Because, I love seeing Anthony Edwards. I would love to see a smaller market team be able to keep their star and eventually even maybe contend for a title, but they're going to have to make smart decisions going forward. You have now added, some flexibility. That's why you reportedly moved off of Karl-Anthony Towns, for the added flexibility that it gives you. But if you're not going to use that, what are you going to do? They're going to be $3 million beneath the first tax apron next year. So that you don't really expect for them to do a lot. But then you look at following years from that, $70 million, $93 million, $157 million, right, in the following offseason. So this is where you need to start setting up and preparing. And it's going to be a really big testament to this front office and how well they're planning this thing out to see where this goes in the future. So I hope, whatever the clarity asks, I really hope that Anthony Edwards is not moved, even though I'll tell you this, if he is moved to a better team that's, has a better constructed team, I would love to see Anthony Edwards be one of those players that gets to go to finals, conference finals every single year. But the Minnesota Timberwolves, if they want to be that team and they want to keep a player like Ant happy, they're going to have to put in that work. And they're going to have to make sure that they are improving everything from going forward for the next 3 offseasons. Has to be making sure that you improve this team and make sure that Ant and the players on this team have an ability to compete, and that you're developing over that time as well, and that you're taking advantage of some things. Once they made that trade for Rudy Gobert and this team went on the run that they did last year, it changed a lot. It changed a lot in the mindset. It changed a lot. Let's hope that they can come out of it on top, and we'll see what happens there. But guys, let me know what you guys think on all that down below. The next team that I want to talk about is the Milwaukee Bucks, the dreaded Milwaukee Bucks for me, because I'm a Bulls fan. It is what it is. The pettiness runs deep. But Mark Stein came out and said that the Bucks right now, that the hurdle, they would have to clear some serious hurdles, but it seems like they are more likely to pursue Bradley Beal than Jimmy Butler. Now, the Milwaukee Bucks are a second tax apron team as well, right? So much like the Suns, where they can't aggregate salaries, they can't move multiple players in deals, they have all these things that they can't do, even if they're looking to improve their team. They do have an ability to get flexible. And one thing that Mark Stein did point out in this that, is interesting is that the Milwaukee Bucks could look to move Pat Connaughton in a separate deal, right? To move him in advance of a larger deal that they're trying to get done, right? Now, if they don't take back bigger salary in that Pat Connaughton deal, it frees up a little bit space for them to where they can make some maneuvers. Right now, they don't have the one contract because that's all they can move to get Bradley Beal or Jimmy Butler. But if they move Pat Connaughton, and then of course Chris Middleton would have to be in any other deal that they do, they can have that flexibility, but they have to give up some other things as well, right? And when you look at these two players, Jimmy Butler averaging 17.6 points per game, 5.4 rebounds, 4.6 assists, and 1.2 steals on 54% shooting from the field and 35% shooting from three. You flip that and look at Bradley Beal, 17.5 points per game, 3.6 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 1.1 steals on 48.5% shooting and 38.5% shooting on the seasons for them so far. He's also shooting 75% from the free throw line, whereas Jimmy Butler shooting 79% from the free throw line. So, if this is to be believed that the Milwaukee Bucks are favoring a Bradley Beal deal, it still raises a lot of questions. Not only does he have his no trade clause that he would have to waive, right? They would also have to make a subsequent trade to not take back much salary in a Pat Connaughton or another deal. And then, they would still need to hope that whatever they have to offer at that point is something that the Phoenix Suns are willing to bite on or get a third team involved, which then becomes even more critical, especially when you look at being over the second tax apron. And so on the Milwaukee Bucks, the Phoenix Suns, if they were able to do a trade between these two teams, I wonder how that would be looked at with the new second tax apron, right? And how the NBA wanted to make that. Now, the Milwaukee Bucks aren't nearly as over the second tax apron as the Phoenix Suns. They're only $6 million above the second tax apron, where the Suns are millions and hundreds of millions over the second tax apron. So if these two teams were able to complete a deal, it'd be very interesting to see if how that could happen, right? And it could provide a path of what other teams understand how they can maneuver in that second tax apron, because that's still a lot what's going on here. A lot of teams are still trying to figure out how to maneuver in this era of the second tax apron. And not to say that it's been made 100% clear yet, because it has not, but they're trying to figure that out, and they're trying to make their way through that to see how that's going to happen. And I tell you what, if the Phoenix Suns and Milwaukee Bucks are able to be a part of a trade, not to say that it's necessarily going to become the blueprint, but it is going to be something that teams look at and say, all right, this is what and how we can move to make things happen, even if we're over the second tax apron. And we'll see what that holds for this team. But in talking about that, we got to talk a little bit about the Miami Heat, but this time we're not going to focus on Jimmy Butler, actually. The Miami Heat today made an adjustment in playing Kel'El Ware with Bam Adebayo. Now, if you guys have been following me for a while, I know there's been a lot of new subscribers. This is a lineup that coming into the season, I actually thought the Miami Heat would implore a lot more, to be 100% honest with you. I thought that they would look to move Bam more to the floor, kind of, get him to do more offense, and having a guy like Kel'El Ware and what he's able to do defensively for that team. Kel'El Ware started the second half after coming off the bench in the first half of that game, and you look at how he finished it in this game. He played so well with 25 points, 8 rebounds, 52% shooting from the field. He also got to the free throw line 4 times, hit all 3 of those. He played really well in that time. And so, when you're trying to fight through some adversity, also as you're going through the season and trying to find something to give your team a little bit of an edge, changing and using different lineups than what you used at the beginning of the season, that's something that you can use to do that. And you look at how Kel'El Ware performed again today against a team that had Wemby on it, who actually did play today. And that's something to really look at as you continue to go forward in that, man. And I think, we'll see what happens with this if they do look to do that, going forward into the future. But I think overall, it could be something that they do look to do. You look at what the Miami Heat were today with Bam Adebayo and Kel'El Ware on the court together. They only played 13 minutes together. They were plus 23. They had a net rating of 83.3, an offensive rating of 133, and a defensive rating of 50. Now, in no way am I saying that that's going to be maintained over a long period of time and over a season. But there is data that you now want to use and look at to try to uncover and to see what you can do on things. Now, Erik Spoelstra after the game did say this. It's such a small sample size, but obviously they're both dynamic defensive players. It gives us more versatility, more ability to make things tough. I think we're at a point that I'll start to do that if I feel it'll help in those end of quarter situations. So Spoelstra already having a plan on how he wants to use this lineup, right? Using it in late quarter situations if the team needs a little bit of boost, if the team needs to get a stop. And I think that's smart. That's why Erik Spoelstra is one of the best coaches in the league. Now, one could say, why didn't he go to it earlier? But it is what it is. The team's going through some adversity. They gotta figure some stuff out. So we'll see what's gonna happen there. But overall, I'll say this. It is something to really look out for and to see if the Miami Heat can continue to use that lineup and that it continues to work for them. And we'll see what happens there. Now, also, last before we get out of here, Mark Stein also adds in this, that the Dallas Mavericks reportedly have interest in trading for Herb Jones from the Pelicans. Now, we'll see what happens here, right? Mark Stein did add in that the Pelicans have been reluctant to include Herb Jones in any trade conversations with any team, but when it looks like, depending on what the Mavs and how aggressive that they are to go after it, that it may happen. Mark Stein also reports that the Mavericks are not willing to surrender Daniel Gafford in a trade to get a defensive wing, which is something opposite of what we heard before. But they like the tandem of Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, so we'll see what happens there. But I think overall, if you're able to add Herb Jones to the Dallas Mavericks, and with the depth that they have, it replaces a lot of what Derek Jones Jr. brought to you in this team. The question remains is that what the Pelicans really want to do, right? Because I know they want to move on from CJ. They want to move on from Brandon Ingram. Do you want to move a young player like Herb? That's the question here. And we'll see, right? But I think that, the Dallas Mavericks, as I've said before, they don't need to be in a place where they're looking to make a move just to make a move. Make the right move that's going to help your team, and then let the rest of the chips fall where they may. But it is something to look out for, and it is something that if the Dallas Mavericks make a move like getting Herb Jones, it would be just like when they added P.J. Washington and Derek Lively and Gafford at the trade deadline last year when Derek Lively came in the draft due to what they did the end of the season prior. But if they're able to add that, it just adds depth and helps gear them up for a playoff run. Luka's eventually coming back, right? We're starting to look towards, I think, the end of this month to get Luka back on the court. And if that happens, listen, the Dallas Mavericks have more than enough runway to still make a considerable move up the standings of the Western Conference. Can they? Will they? That remains to be seen. But overall, I like that the Mavericks continue to be a team that's just looking to add, right? If it makes sense. And you got to, no matter what NBA fan you are, what team you're a fan of, I appreciate teams that are good, but are always willing to make the right move if it really makes them better and increases their chances. We'll see if the Dallas Mavericks do end up pulling the trigger on something. If not, we'll see what happens with that one. And this just in. I was about to end the show, but apparently it seems like the Minnesota Timberwolves are interested in getting involved in the Jimmy Butler trade sweepstakes. Now, this one just came out. Literally, as I got an alert for it as I was about to end the show, that they're willing to get involved in the Jimmy Butler trade talks. I don't know how to feel about that. But I'm going to read the quote here. The Raptors are volunteering to participate in an eventual Butler trade as a third or fourth team facilitator that doesn't land Butler but takes part in the transaction. This is from Mark Stein. When I relayed that to one well-placed source, I was told that about half of the league has made similar feelings known to the Heat as they try to concoct a trade that brings this saga to an end. The group is believed to include the Timberwolves, but again, in the role of trade facilitator and not with the intent to bring Jimmy Butler back to Minnesota. Now, that makes a little bit more sense. Again, this real time, my bad. I'm going through this real time as the alert came up. But, this will make sense for the Minnesota Timberwolves. When you're involved as a team that helps facilitates a bigger deal, you get assets back. And with the Minnesota Timberwolves being in the place where they are right now, per what we talked about earlier, it can make some sense for them to try to get any assets back, even if that means that making a deal and being a facilitator. So I'm not necessarily too mad at that one. But as always, let me know what you guys think on that down below. Make sure you guys are following us at NBA Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, NBA Central Show @gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the #1 spot for everything basketball related, but that's thanks to you lovely and beautiful people. And I'll see you guys the next time I feel like making a video. Probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.